Today we're celebrating All Souls Day. It's an interesting word, soul. You know, centuries of theologians have asked, does the individual have a soul? And what they usually mean by that question is, does the individual have something that is subject to happiness or misery after this life? And I confess I don't have the answer to that question. When I use the word soul, I'm referring to that part of us that is very much a part of this world. I use it as a metaphor for a deep feeling or emotion, something that really stirs me, calls me from deep within. Think about how we might refer to someone as soulful, or searching for a soulmate, or engaging in soul searching. In that context, perhaps we can think about the celebration of All Souls Day as a time to remember the people, places, and happenings in our lives that have affected us most deeply. Thomas More has said that the soul is that part of us that is fundamentally oriented toward life and toward our attachments. The soul tends to be attached to places, people, and things for being in relationship, for staying embedded in life. The soul wants to be involved. And sometimes the soul needs to be stuck, reluctant to move on, reluctant to embrace detachment, even though that may mean that we are suffering. Because it is through attachment, initiated through the body's senses, that the soul gets nourished. And when the soul is nourished, our lives deepen, right? So soulfulness requires that we develop an attitude of reverence for grief and sorrow, which is one of the reasons we go through this ritual every year to remember the things that we have grieved, respecting the ways in which our attachments have affected us. And yes, the Buddhists are correct in saying that our attachments cause suffering, but a soulful response to life says, in this moment, I choose to suffer. Let me feel my grief. Let me feel my sorrow. Let me bring these feelings into the daylight. Because today, feeling this way feels like my sacred duty. Grief and loss touch all of us. And for most of our time as a species, our primary association with grief has been through the death of someone we love, which we are honoring this morning. But to be human is to know loss of many kinds. And in his book called The Wild Edge of Sorrow, psychotherapist Francis Weller reminds us that today it is also important to honor multiple losses that we experience in order that we not feel overwhelmed by it. Our losses today are both personal and communal, intimate and shared. And Weller says that when we acknowledge the things that we are grieving and welcome them in rather than fearing them, we can bring more vitality to our lives, a vitality that I call soulfulness. So Weller describes what he calls 5 gates of grief, different kinds of grief that we can experience. And I want to focus on these 5 kinds of grief for the next few moments, because as we continue our ritual of All Souls Day, I want you to keep some of these other ways of grieving in mind, and we'll add to our altar. So the first state of grief, he says, is the one that we're most familiar with, and that is that we know that all things are impermanent, that everything and everyone is a gift, and nothing and no one lasts. And this grief dares us to say, I choose to love, even though I know what I love is not going to be here forever. I choose to let someone or something be at the very core of my being, finding a home in my heart. And this is not just about relationships, but it could be about work, it could be about the loss of our health, anything that we know is impermanent, but we choose to respect and care for it anyway. The second gate of grief that Weller talks about, though, kind of surprised me. And he said, this is the places within us that have not known love. The places within us that have not known love. Tender places that have not been nourished with kindness, compassion, or a sense of welcome. And these places, he says, if they are not acknowledged and grieved, can lead us to be ashamed of ourselves in certain ways for traits that we may have that have not been welcomed in our younger years. These are traits that Carl Jung used to call our shadow. And sometimes people are a little bit confused about what Jung meant when he said we all have a shadow self. And I like to think of it as this way. Think about a trait that you have that you highly regard, that you think it's always present when you're at your best. A trait that's really, really important for you to embrace. And then think about what is the opposite of that. That opposite trait is your shadow, okay? It's still a part of you, but you don't want to acknowledge it. It may have caused a lack of welcome for you in the past, but it may also be something that is appropriate to your life now in some way that you want to restore in order to have a bigger life. The places within us that have not known love. The third gate of grief that he talks about is grief for the sorrows of the world. This gate is a little bit more familiar to us, even if we don't acknowledge it consciously. The daily diminishment of species, habitats, cultures, languages, our ways of living are corrosive to the earth, to mercy, democracy, and justice. It is appropriate for us to respond with grief for the loss of these things, with outrage, and sometimes even with apology for the ways in which our lives have contributed to these losses. The fourth gate invites us to grieve what we expected and did not receive. When we are born and as we pass through childhood, we are designed to expect a certain welcome from the world. At the core of this gate of grief is our longing to belong. And while this may seem really similar to the second gate of grief that I talked about, the second one, I think, has more to do with how we belong to ourselves, and the fourth one has to do with how we belong in the world. When we have profound feelings of not belonging, it is not through our personal failure, but through a society that has failed to offer our bodies and minds what it expected. And this tends to be a very unconscious grief, but it can keep us from living our full lives. Having a sense of belonging means having our gifts recognized. We come here with this kind of intuition that we have a bundle of gifts to bring to the community. And this giftedness may lie at what we do to make a living in the world, but it may not. There are some cultures where, well, let me say this. Have you gone to a party recently and met someone new, and the first question you ask is, what do you do for a living? There are some cultures where that question, when you're meeting someone for the first time, is, what gifts do you bring to the world? Can you imagine how a question like that might open up the conversation in a different way, allowing each person to feel whole and seen? And the fifth gate Weller talks about is called ancestral grief. We carry this grief in our bodies that was experienced by our ancestors. Many of our ancestors arrived in the Americas, leaving their homes, their families, their communities behind. Some arrived here after being abducted and forced into slavery. Others were already here and were forced onto reservations. These generations survived without a feeling of home. Traditions that nourished and held these people for hundreds of years needed to be left behind, and many of us still feel this loss in our bodies, even after generations. So these 5 gates to grief that Weller describes invite us to develop a healthy relationship with loss. Grief does not visit us to hold us hostage. It invites us instead to be our most soulful selves, inviting a more creative tension, perhaps, between grieving and gratitude. So as we continue our ritual this morning, I invite you to reflect on these 5 stages of grief that I've just mentioned. The grief of impermanence, the grief for the places within us that have not known love, the grief for the sorrows of the world, the grief for what we expected and did not receive, and our ancestral grief. These words by Rumi: "This being human is a guest house. Every morning a new arrival, a joy, a depression, a meanness, So momentary awareness comes as an unexpected visitor. Welcome and entertain them all. Even if they are a crowd of sorrows who violently sweep your house empty of its furniture, still treat each guest honorably, maybe clearing you out for some new delight. The dark thought, the shame, the malice, meet them at the door laughing and invite them in. Be grateful for whoever comes, because each has been sent as a guide from beyond.
Lighting a candle is somewhat like the beginning of life. If that is true, then perhaps extinguishing a candle is like the ending of life. But death may not be the end of us. We live on in the memories of friends and loved ones. The influence we possessed in life works on, moving persons or causes forward. Let us not forget that most candles have more than one life, and so perhaps may we. Please join me in reciting our UUPF blessing. Bless us with hope, bless us with care, bless us with love, bless all we share. Blessed be, Amen, Shalom, Salam, Namaste, Ashe.